Is the next step tabled?
I'm afraid I'd have to agree, Minister. Actually, hypocrisy jumps out. And you talk about humanitarian crisis. The actual cost of the sanctions greatly exceeds the cost of the humanitarian aid that's going in. And there's a serious question about that humanitarian aid and where it's coming from. South Sudan has been mentioned, Yemen, Libya, Iraq and the Democratic Republic of Congo, and I can mention many more. And you're clapping yourself on the back because this was an incremental decision. So it was a slow decision to become one of the best boys in the European class, rather than standing up with our neutral voice for peace. And the Constitution in Venezuela that was brought in 1999 has the mechanisms within it for leading to a peaceful solution. And if we were genuinely interested in bringing peace to Venezuela and not taking oil out of it or backing up America as they take oil out of it, would we be standing up as a neutral country and setting in place the means to bring peace to that country? The hypocrisy is simply appalling, Minister. I see why you stuck to your script, because I think if you moved from your script, you would have been in serious trouble with your own conscience in relation to this matter.
The EU is coordinating with Uruguay, Deputy. That's exactly what's happening. The EU has set up a contact group in order to focus on peaceful democratic solutions here. That's the contribution that the EU is making. And I mean, you seem to be focused solely on the US approach here. And I think it's important to say that the EU has made its own statements and made its own decisions in relation to Venezuela and how we should respond to a totally unacceptable deterioration of conditions that has resulted in 3 million refugees leaving Venezuela, which is destabilising its neighbour states as well. So this isn't just an issue about Venezuela itself. It's the impact of what is happening in Venezuela on neighbouring states and on the region. And even on the EU, the number of Venezuelans that have come to Spain, for example, is a very significant number in the last 3 years. So whether we like it or not, this is an issue that is impacting on everybody, and the EU, as a significant contributor to the foreign policy debate, needed to take a position. And unlike you, Deputy, I don't recognise, and the EU collectively doesn't recognise, that the last presidential election was free and fair and that President Maduro was legitimately elected. So they don't accept that those elections were run in a free and fair way without intimidation. And so what we are trying to do now is ensure that there is an interim mechanism that allows for the facilitation of free and fair presidential elections. When people talk about Yemen and Iraq and the DRC and Libya and so on, we talk about those issues all the time. I talk about those issues all the time. I was speaking specifically about some of those issues in the Human Rights Council in Geneva this week. So, less of the lecturing, please, in relation to comparing crises. There are very legitimate and very, very real concerns in many countries across the world. But that doesn't mean that we should ignore something and the scale of what's happening potentially in a hugely influential country in Latin and South America. And so the EU has tried, and on many occasions the EU is not able to actually respond to crises like this with one voice. In this instance, they were able to do it. And the EU is often criticised for not being able to have a collective influence and impact for the better in different parts of the world. We're trying to respond to that criticism in relation to Venezuela here. And so, if you look at the humanitarian response that the EU is trying to provide to Yemen, yesterday Ireland committed €5 million to humanitarian assistance in Yemen. Minister Connolly did, just yesterday. Let's not start comparing all of these areas. But what we are trying to do here is be part of an EU collective effort to build pressure to try to deliver a democratic solution. And there has been a recognition of a temporary president in order to facilitate that, as opposed to anything more permanent than that. But this isn't about overthrowing governments. It's about trying to facilitate an election that can allow the Venezuelan people to decide what kind of government they want.
I have to give 4 brief supplementaries.
Minister, in the first instance, I'd like to just put on record that my colleague, Deputy Maureen O'Sullivan, you've accused her of not being interested in humanitarian aid. And I know you probably didn't mean that, but it's certain. You did actually, Minister. No interest. You said she had no interest in humanitarian aid. In relation to the issue, my question specifically was in relation to the statement made by the UN rapporteur who was appointed, and he made a statement in January. Coercion, whether military or economic, must never be used to seek a change in government in a sovereign state. The use of sanctions by outside powers to overthrow an elected government is in violation of all norms of international law. It's a long statement, and it goes on. That's the UN Special Rapporteur in a specific area, in the area of human rights. Now, you're standing here and telling us that you're happy that there's an EU collective voice. I'm certainly not happy. We're a neutral country with a proud record, up to very recently, where people would listen to us. If we were seriously interested, Minister, and if you were, we would be talking, as has been said, to the people on the ground in Venezuela. We're picking and choosing our countries depending on what Mr. Trump wants, because it's difficult to call him president, but he is, and what the EU wants. And oil is top of the agenda here. Now, it's appalling to come in here and tell us that the EU and you have a collective voice in relation to this, standing over sanctions that are going to cause a lot more damage. We know it from Iraq. Sanctions cause more distress, more upset and more human suffering on the ground than anything else.
First of all, in case there was any confusion earlier, I certainly wouldn't ever suggest that Maureen O'Sullivan isn't interested in humanitarian aid. She's one of the people in this House who I have huge regard for on issues like this. So just to put that on the record, she has a long and distinguished contribution to make in relation to humanitarian assistance in lots of conflicts and difficult situations. So, but let me put that to bed. If that was taken from what I said earlier, it wasn't what I meant. In relation to, can I just say, the motivation behind any decision that I've taken or the Irish Government has taken is about trying to support democratic decision-making, Deputy, not the opposite to that. Many people on the other side of this House put me under pressure all the time for Ireland to do more to intervene when democracy is being undermined, or when human rights are being abused, or when humanitarian relief can't get in. How much criticism have I taken in this House for not speaking up in a stronger way in terms of getting humanitarian relief into Yemen? But when I say it in relation to Venezuela, you criticise me because you are recognising a president in Venezuela that I don't believe to be democratically and fairly elected. So there's hypocrisy here coming from the other side of the House, I would suggest. What we have tried to do here is work with EU partners and other neutral member states. Sweden has taken the same position. Austria has taken the same position. Malta has taken the same position. Other countries that are neutral within the European Union, that aren't aligned militarily, have taken the same position, and most of them took the same position before we did, actually, in relation to trying to have a collective effort and a collective message coming from the European Union that we want a peaceful resolution to this, not a violent one, that we totally reject any suggestion that there could be military incursions into Venezuela, and that we continually appeal to all involved, including Mr. Maduro, to be able to facilitate a peaceful and democratic solution to this crisis that has driven millions of people out of his own country.
Deputy.